Before the world, there was silence. Not the silence of an empty room, or the silence that falls between two sounds. This was the silence of absolute negation, the silence of a universe that did not yet exist, that had not yet conceived of the possibility of existing. There was no sky. There was no earth. There was no darkness, because darkness requires the memory of light, and light had not yet been thought. There was only Khnum. Khnum, the primordial waters, not a sea you could sail, not a flood you could measure. Khnum was not alive. It was the opposite of life, an infinite, undifferentiated abyss of inertia so complete it had no surface, no floor, no direction, no time. This was not emptiness in the way we use the word, implying a space that could be filled. None was the crushing absence of everything that existence requires. It did not wait. It did not stir. It simply pressed in all directions without end. And yet, folded into that darkness, somehow, impossibly, was the seed of all things, every god that would ever be, every human that would ever weep, every story that would ever be told. And then, in the heart of that darkness, something happened that the darkness did not cause and could not have predicted. A god woke himself into existence by sheer force of will. His name was Atum, and before he spoke his first word, the world was already changing. Welcome to Aeonkeep, where the ancient legends live. Today, the Egyptian creation, the story of how existence emerged from the primordial waters across 3,000 years of theological thought that is among the most sophisticated the ancient world produced. Egypt did not have one creation story. It had several, and this is not a sign of confusion or inconsistency. It is a sign of a civilization that took cosmological questions seriously enough to return to them again and again across millennia, allowing different answers to coexist, each true in the way that truth is measured in myth, not by exclusion, but by resonance. Three great centers of religious thought each developed their own account of how the world began. At Heliopolis, the ancient city the Egyptians called Unu, theologians shaped the tradition of Atum and the Ennead, the group of 9 gods from whom all creation descended. At Memphis, the priests of Ptah developed a creation theology of remarkable intellectual sophistication, arguing that the world was not made through physical act, but through thought and word, a doctrine modern scholars have compared to the Greek concept of the Logos. And at Hermopolis, the city of Thoth, a third tradition imagined creation as emerging from the interaction of 8 primordial forces, the Ogdoad, whose very nature described the qualities of the void before existence. These were not competing myths in the modern sense. Egyptian religious thought was capacious. A scribe at Heliopolis did not need to reject Memphis to believe in Atum. The traditions layered and merged and interpreted one another across the centuries. What follows is an account of Egyptian creation that honors all three: their distinctiveness, their convergences, and the vast cosmological imagination that produced them. The primary sources are among the oldest religious texts in human history. The pyramid texts, inscribed in the burial chambers of 5th and 6th dynasty pharaohs beginning around 2400 BCE, contain the earliest recorded versions of these creation accounts. The coffin texts that followed them, and later the Book of the Dead, elaborated and extended what the pyramid texts had begun. In the beginning, Atum floated in the waters of Khnum. He was alone, not lonely, because loneliness requires the knowledge of other beings, and no other beings yet existed. He was simply complete in himself, self-created, self-sufficient, the one the ancient texts call Atum, who came into being by himself. His name in Egyptian carried the double meaning of completeness and nothingness. He was both the totality of what would exist and the void from which it had not yet emerged. From the dark water the first land rose. This was the Benben, a mound, a hill, a point of emergence. The image was intimately connected to the experience of the Egyptian world. Every year, when the Nile flood receded, the fertile black earth re-emerged from the water, ready to receive life. Creation, in the Egyptian imagination, was not an abstraction. It was something that happened again each year in the fields. The Benben mound was also echoed in the form of the obelisk, and some scholars have argued it is the form that gave rise to the pyramid itself, the primordial hill made permanent in stone, the moment of first emergence frozen for eternity. Atum stood upon the Benben, and he began to create. What happened next was not delicate. The Heliopolitan tradition is explicit, and its language is deliberately physical, because the act of creation required a union of generative forces, and Atum contained within himself both principles. The pyramid texts record two acts in the same breath. Atum masturbated to produce his seed, and he sneezed and spat, expelling the first air and moisture from his own body. From himself, through himself, he forced two children into existence, Shu, the god of air and light, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture, the world's first pair, the first breath and the first dew, born together from a single act of desperate, solitary generation. Shu and Tefnut, in their turn, gave birth to Geb and Nut, the earth and the sky. And here the Egyptian imagination produced one of its most striking images: Geb lying flat, the land itself, and Nut arching above him in a great curve, her body the vault of the heavens, studded with stars. Between them, Shu, the god of air, holding them apart. The sky and earth separated by the breath that fills the space between. Geb and Nut produced 4 children: Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys. These were the last of the Ennead, the 9 gods of the Heliopolitan tradition, whose lineage ran from Atum to the divine family that would shape the moral universe of Egyptian mythology. But the Heliopolitan account was not the only account, and the tradition of Memphis offered something different in character, less a narrative than a philosophy. The god at the center of the Memphite tradition was Ptah, craftsman, architect, patron of artisans, and the Memphis theologians made an extraordinary claim on his behalf. Atum had created with the body, Ptah created with the mind. In the absolute silence that preceded everything, Ptah perceived the universe in his heart. The heart, in Egyptian understanding, being the seat of thought, not merely emotion. He conceived of existence before it existed. He held the whole of creation as an idea. And then he opened his mouth. He spoke the names of all things, and in the speaking they became real. The void did not give way gently. Reality was not coaxed or shaped. It was commanded into being by the sheer authority of a divine voice breaking silence that had never been broken before. This was not a metaphor the theologians of Memphis offered casually. They were arguing in the language available to them that existence itself is contingent on being perceived and named, that the universe is, at its foundation, an act of language. The third great tradition belonged to Hermopolis, the city of Thoth, god of wisdom and writing, and it was perhaps the most philosophically rigorous of all in its conception of the void. The Hermopolitan tradition described the state before creation through 8 primordial forces, the Ogdoad, 4 pairs of entities, male and female, each representing a quality of the pre-creation darkness. Nun and Naunet, the primordial waters, He and Hauhet, infinite space, Kek and Kauket, darkness, Amun and Amaunet, hiddenness, the concealed. These 8 did not create the world by acting upon it from outside. They were the qualities of the void. They were what nothingness was made of, and their interaction, their churning together in the dark water, produced the burst of energy from which creation emerged, a cosmic egg, or in some versions, a lotus rising from the deep, from which the sun god appeared for the first time. In the Hermopolitan account, the world was not made by a single god who preceded it. The world made itself from the properties of its own absence. From these great theological frameworks, the Egyptians also told the story of human origins. And here too, more than one tradition existed. One account held that humanity was formed from the tears of Ra, the sun god. When Ra wept, his tears fell to the earth and became people. The word for tears in ancient Egyptian, remit, was linked by a play on words to the word for humanity, RMT. This is not mere coincidence. Egyptian theology was deeply interested in the power of language to reveal hidden connections in reality, and the identity of sound between the two words was understood as meaningful, a trace of cosmic design embedded in speech itself. A second tradition placed the creation of humanity in the hands of Khnum, the ram-headed god of the Nile's source, who shaped human beings on a potter's wheel, fashioning not just the body, but the ka, the vital essence, the spiritual double that animated each person throughout their life. Both traditions say something true in the way myth measures truth. One says that humanity is the sorrow of a God made flesh, that we carry in our very existence the weight of divine grief. The other says we are shaped with intention, crafted by deliberate hands, given a spirit as deliberately as a potter gives clay its form. The pyramid texts, our earliest source, already show a tradition in which multiple cosmological frameworks coexist. The texts do not attempt to reconcile them. They place them side by side, drawing on whichever account serves the ritual purpose of the moment. This is important. The Egyptians were not confused. They were working within a theological paradigm that modern scholars sometimes call complementarity. The idea that contradictory accounts of ultimate reality can each be true in the way that different languages can each describe the same thing. The Benben stone is attested archaeologically at Heliopolis, though the original has not survived. The temple of Atum Ra at Heliopolis was one of the great sacred centers of the ancient world, and the obelisks that once stood at its entrance, 2 of which now stand in New York and London, misnamed Cleopatra's Needles, were themselves understood as embodiments of the first mound and the first ray of light. We know of the Memphite tradition in its fullest form because it survives carved into black basalt. The Shabaka stone, chiseled in the 8th century BCE and claimed by its makers to be the copy of a worm-eaten papyrus of impossible antiquity, preserves the Memphite theology in its most complete surviving form. Whether the text is as old as it claims is a matter scholars continue to debate. The Egyptologist John Baines is among those who have urged caution about reading it as straightforwardly ancient. What is not in dispute is that the ideas it contains represent a genuine and sophisticated strand of Egyptian theological speculation. The Ogdoad of Hermopolis is well attested across multiple periods. The 8 primordial forces are documented in texts ranging from the Middle Kingdom through the Greco-Roman period. The tradition of the lotus rising from the primordial water is one of the most persistent images in Egyptian religious art, appearing in tomb paintings, papyri, and temple reliefs across more than 2,000 years. The derivation of RMT, humanity, from remit, tears, is a genuine Egyptian wordplay documented in ancient texts, though whether it was understood as a literal etymological claim or as a theological resonance is a matter scholars continue to discuss. Every culture that has ever existed has looked at the fact of existence and asked the same question. Why is there something rather than nothing? The Egyptian answer, or rather the Egyptian answers, are not naive. They do not reach for a simple beginning. They imagine creation as a problem that requires multiple approaches. The physical act of generation, the power of the spoken word, the inherent properties of the void itself. They understand that the question of origins is not one question, but many, and that no single framework captures all of it. And they add something that most creation traditions do not: the insistence that creation is not finished. Every morning when the sun rose over the horizon, the Egyptians understood it not as a repetition of something that had already happened, but as the reenactment of the first dawn. Ra's daily passage across the sky and his nightly journey through the underworld, the Duat, the realm of the dead, through which he had to pass before he could be reborn, was not clockwork. It was a story that had to be told again each day. The priests in the temples rose before dawn to perform their rituals because the sunrise was not guaranteed. It had to be sustained. Creation, in the Egyptian imagination, was not a past event. It was an ongoing act. It required participation. It required witness. The question that remains is the one the Egyptians never stopped asking. If existence had to be actively maintained, if the first light had to be re-earned each morning, what does it mean to live inside a world that is always, in some sense, still being made? If you want to go deeper into the ancient world, Aeonkeep Mythology ebooks explore these ancient myths in full, the stories, the gods, and the worlds that shaped them. You'll find the link in the description. This legend has been told. Subscribe and return to Aeonkeep. More legends await.